That quiet moment when the silver fork slipped from her trembling hand and clattered against the bone china, echoing through a ballroom that had gone dead silent. That was the moment I knew 3 months of late nights hunched over bank statements and court filings had been worth every single minute. My name is Margaret Caldwell. I am 61 years old, and for 34 years I worked as a senior accountant for a family-run firm in Kingston, Ontario. I raised my daughter on my own after her father died in a snowmobile accident when she was only 5 years old. And at her engagement dinner at one of the finest hotels in Toronto, I brought down the wealthiest family in the Niagara region. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how a woman who spent her life balancing other people's books ended up balancing the scales of justice against people who thought they were untouchable. It began last September on a crisp autumn evening, the kind where the maple leaves along the lakeshore had just started turning that deep rust color we get here in Ontario. My daughter Claire came by the house with takeaway from the Tim Hortons down the road, which was unusual because she normally insisted on cooking when she visited. She was 29, a speech pathologist at the Children's Hospital in Kingston, the gentlest soul you could ever meet, exactly like her father had been. She sat across from me at my kitchen table, stirring her double-double with a nervous little smile, and I knew before she said a word that something had changed. "Mom," she said, "I wanted to tell you in person. I've been seeing someone." I handed her the plate of butter tarts I had baked that afternoon. "Tell me about him." "His name is Spencer Haverford. He's a partner at his family's investment firm in Toronto. They manage portfolios for half the wealthy families between Niagara and Muskoka." Something tightened in my chest. The Haverfords. You did not grow up in this province without knowing that name. Jonathan Haverford had built an empire on private wealth management, commercial real estate along the Golden Horseshoe, and a handful of boutique hotels in Niagara-on-the-Lake. His wife, Celeste Haverford, was the sort of woman whose face appeared in the society pages of the Globe and Mail, chairing galas at the Royal Ontario Museum and the National Ballet of Canada. People like us did not cross paths with people like them. Not in this country, not in this life. "How did you two meet?" I asked, keeping my voice even. "At the hospital. His grandmother had a stroke, and I was part of the rehabilitation team helping her relearn to speak. He came every single day to sit with her. We started talking in the waiting room, and one afternoon he asked if he could buy me a coffee." She paused, and that small nervous smile came back. "He's different, Mom. He actually listens. He doesn't treat me like I'm just a therapist." Just a therapist. Those two words lodged themselves under my ribs like a splinter. Why on earth would my daughter ever feel she had to qualify her profession that way? I had raised her to be proud of the work she did. Helping children who had suffered strokes or brain injuries learn to speak again, giving families back their children's voices, that was sacred work. But I smiled and nodded and asked when I would get to meet him. Over the next several weeks, Claire spoke of Spencer constantly. He took her to restaurants on King Street, where the tasting menus cost more than my weekly grocery bill. He drove her up to his family's property in Prince Edward County for long weekends. He bought her a winter coat from a boutique on Bloor Street that I later discovered cost $3,000. She was falling in love, truly falling, and every good thing in me wanted to be happy for her. But something underneath kept scratching at the back of my mind like a mouse behind the drywall. I met Spencer for the first time at Thanksgiving. Claire brought him to my little blue house in Kingston, the one with the crooked porch and the garden I had tended for 20 years. He was handsome, I will give him that. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a blazer that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, even though it was only a casual family dinner. He shook my hand and held my eyes a beat too long. "Mrs. Caldwell, Claire has told me so many wonderful things about you." The words were smooth as polished stone, too smooth. During dinner, he talked about his firm's expansion into Vancouver and Calgary, about the new hotel his father was opening in Niagara-on-the-Lake next summer, about his plans to eventually take over the family business. When I asked about his interests outside of work, he paused just a little too long before mentioning golf and yachting. He glanced at his watch twice. When Claire got up to fetch the dessert from the kitchen, he did something I will never forget. He looked around my living room, at the framed photographs on the mantel, at the worn couch I had owned since Claire was in elementary school, at the upright piano I had bought at an estate sale in Gananoque, and his face made the subtle adjustment of a man mentally calculating what everything was worth and finding the total disappointing. I said nothing. Claire was radiant, and I did not want to steal that from her. At Christmas, Spencer proposed. He did it at his family's estate in King Township, on a snow-covered terrace overlooking their private pond, with his entire extended family watching from inside. Claire phoned me afterwards from the car, crying the happy kind of tears, and I told her I was thrilled for her. I truly was. But I lay awake that night staring at the ceiling, and the scratching behind the drywall would not stop. Something about the Haverfords felt like walking into a beautifully restored heritage home and catching the faintest whiff of mold behind the fresh paint. The engagement dinner was in February, held at the Haverford estate 2 hours north of the city. 200 guests, catering by a chef who had trained at Canoe in Toronto, a string quartet playing Vivaldi in a converted barn that had been styled to look like something out of a bridal magazine. I wore the gray dress I had bought for my sister's 60th birthday party 3 years earlier. Claire had offered to take me shopping at Holt Renfrew, but I refused. I was not going to pretend to be something I was not, and I was not going to let the Haverfords change who Claire's mother was. Celeste Haverford greeted me at the entrance. She was in her late 50s, her silver blonde hair cut in that expensive, deceptively simple style that costs $600 at a salon on Yorkville Avenue. Her diamonds caught the light from the chandeliers and scattered it across the limestone floor. Margaret, isn't it? So lovely. Claire mentioned you'd been a bookkeeper up in Kingston. How sweet. Accountant. Senior accountant. 34 years. But she had already turned away, air-kissing another guest, whose name she clearly considered more worth remembering. I found my seat near the back of the room, beside an elderly uncle who kept calling me Maureen. The dinner was a quiet form of torture. I watched Claire work the room, laughing too hard at jokes I knew she did not find funny, nodding at political opinions I knew she disagreed with. Spencer kept his hand on the small of her back the entire evening. Not affectionately, proprietarily, like a man displaying an acquisition he had recently made. Then came the toasts. Jonathan Haverford spoke first, a long ramble about family legacy and the importance of passing on values to the next generation. Then Celeste stood, tapped her crystal glass with a silver spoon, and smiled the kind of smile that should have been classified as a weapon. I wanted to take a moment to welcome our future daughter-in-law into the Haverford family. Claire is such a dear girl, so very hard-working. I understand she more or less raised herself, which I think is just admirable, truly. A ripple of polite laughter moved through the room. My hand closed around the linen napkin in my lap. When Spencer first told me he was dating a speech therapist from Kingston, I confess I had my questions. We'd always pictured him settling down with someone from a similar background, someone who understood our world. But Claire has shown us that character can really overcome quite humble beginnings. She's determined to rise to the occasion, and we Haverfords believe in giving people opportunities to grow. Celeste raised her glass. To Claire. May our family be a wonderful education for her. Everyone applauded. My daughter smiled the smile of a woman who had just been slapped in public and was pretending it was a compliment. I watched the light go out behind her eyes, watched her swallow whatever she wanted to say, watched her squeeze Spencer's hand, and find that he was already laughing along with his mother. And something very still and very cold settled in my chest, like the first frost on the St. Lawrence River before the long winter sets in. I drove back to Kingston that night, 3 hours through the darkness along the 401, and by the time I pulled into my driveway I had made a decision. People who worked that hard to make others feel small were almost always hiding something, and I had spent 34 years finding things that other people hoped nobody would ever look for. I began the following Monday. I started with the public stuff, the things anyone with an internet connection and a little patience can pull: corporate filings through the Ontario Business Registry, property records through the Land Registry Office, court dockets from the Superior Court of Justice. I drove to Toronto twice to sit in the archives at Osgoode Hall. I requested documents through the federal court system, and what I found in those first few weeks was only the surface, but the surface was already troubling. Haverford Capital Partners had been named in 2 civil suits in the past 18 months, both by former clients alleging that their retirement funds had been moved into questionable holdings without their written authorization. Both suits had been quietly settled with non-disclosure agreements attached. I found liens against 2 of the family's commercial properties in Niagara on the lake that had been satisfied under peculiar timing. I found that the hotel opening in the spring had failed 2 rounds of municipal building inspections, and that the inspections had suddenly come back clean after a change in inspector. But all of that was business. Irregularities, yes, perhaps worse than irregularities, but not yet personal. The personal part came in early December. I was driving home from a dental appointment in Belleville, and I stopped at a little diner off the highway because the snow was coming down too heavy to keep going. I was nursing a coffee in a booth by the window when I looked up and saw Jonathan Haverford sitting 3 tables over with a woman who most certainly was not Celeste. She was in her late 30s, auburn hair, a soft maritime accent I caught when she ordered. She called him Johnny. She touched his wrist when she laughed, and just before they left, he bent across the table and kissed her with the unhurried familiarity of a man who had been doing exactly that for many years. I noted her license plate in the parking lot. That night I drove to London to meet with a private investigator whose name I had been given by an old colleague, a retired forensic accountant I had worked with on a labor board case back in the 90s. His name was Harold Duquette, a former OPP detective who now ran a modest practice out of a rented office above a dry cleaner. He did not ask why I wanted the information. He looked at the license plate, nodded once, and quoted his fee. I wrote him a check. 2 weeks later, Harold called me and asked me to drive down. The papers he laid across his desk made my hands tremble. Her name was Melanie Arsenault. She was originally from Moncton. Jonathan Haverford had been involved with her for 19 years. They had 3 children together, 2 boys and a girl, ranging in age from 17 down to 9. He paid for a house in Oakville that was registered in a numbered Ontario corporation, a corporation whose sole director was a Toronto lawyer on retainer to Haverford Capital. He had been redirecting funds through that numbered company for the entire duration of the affair. The children attended private school in Mississauga. The eldest was about to start at Queen's University, where I myself had once taken night courses. Harold slid another folder across the desk. "Mrs. Caldwell, you should see this." It was a summary of an active investigation by the Ontario Securities Commission into Haverford Capital Partners. They had been misrepresenting client portfolios, moving money between accounts to paper over losses, and using new investor capital to cover redemption requests from older clients. The word he used was polite. I had spent 34 years in accounting, and I knew another word for it. They were running a Ponzi scheme in slow motion, wrapped in the respectability of private wealth management and country club memberships. "How soon does it go public?" I asked. Harold shrugged. "These things take time. Could be 6 months, could be 18. But when it breaks, Mrs. Caldwell, there are going to be retirees in this province who lose everything. A lot of the investors are teachers, nurses, small business owners who trusted the family name." I thought about that for a long time on the drive home. People like me, people like the mothers and fathers of the children my daughter helped learn to speak. For 3 weeks I wrestled with what to do. If I went to Claire privately, she would not believe me. She would think I was jealous, or snobbish in reverse, or unable to let go of my only child. She was already half inside that world, already doubting her own judgment, already apologizing for where she had come from. I had watched that slow erosion at the engagement dinner, and I knew that a private warning would only push her further into their arms. I talked it over with my dearest friend Beatrice, a retired principal who lives 2 streets over from me and has been my confidant since Claire was in diapers. "Margaret," she said, sitting at my kitchen table with a mug of tea between her hands, "if you tell her now, she may well choose him. But if you say nothing, she's going to end up married into a family that's going to collapse on top of her, and she'll never forgive you for knowing and keeping quiet. You have to give her the truth. Let her choose with her eyes open." She was right. But I still could not bring myself to do it, because Claire was happy, and sometimes hope feels more important than truth. Then the week before the wedding, something happened that made the decision for me. Claire had asked me to come to her condo in Toronto that Thursday afternoon to help her pack up a box of baby photos for the slideshow at the reception. I took the train in from Kingston and let myself into her building with the fob she had given me. She had texted me an hour earlier to say she was running late at the hospital and would be home by 5. It was only 4:30. I rode the elevator up, let myself into her unit, and began sorting through the photos on her dining table. I heard the front door unlock, but it was not Claire. It was Spencer and his friend Trevor Ashworth, a man I had met twice and disliked both times. I was standing behind the open kitchen island, and the sightline from the entryway did not reach me. I should have called out immediately. I meant to. But something about the way they came in laughing stopped me cold. "So, you're actually going through with this thing on Saturday," Trevor said. Spencer laughed, that quick, dismissive laugh I had heard at Thanksgiving, when he thought I had not been listening. "It's perfect. Claire is so grateful to be marrying up she'll never ask a single question. She's pathologically kind, Trev. You should meet her mother, sweet little widow up in Kingston, the whole thing. They've been living hand to mouth her entire life. She'll sign whatever my father puts in front of her. And love? Love is for people who haven't read a prenup. Claire is a beautiful investment. Low overhead, stable income from the hospital, decent optics for the firm. The OSC thing is going to get ugly, and nothing plays better in the press than photographs of Spencer Haverford and his sweet charitable speech therapist wife visiting sick kids. Your mother hates her. My mother hates anyone not born into the club. She'll come around once Claire gives her grandchildren. Healthy grandchildren who can help rehabilitate the family image when Dad's situation goes public." I did not breathe. I pressed myself back against the pantry door, and I did not breathe until I heard them walk into the living room and turn on the television. Then I moved, silently, with my purse and my coat, and I let myself out the door of the condo and rode the elevator down and walked 4 blocks before I let myself cry. That night, on the train back to Kingston, I began to plan. I would not pull Claire aside privately. I would not call her and plead. She would not believe me. And if she did believe me, she would feel ashamed, and shame is a poison that makes women stay with men who hurt them. No, I would show her. I would show every single person in that ballroom on Saturday. I would give her the gift of a clean public break with her dignity intact, and the ability to look every one of those guests in the eye and know they had all seen the truth at the same moment she did. The wedding was scheduled for that Saturday afternoon at the Royal Provincial Hotel in downtown Toronto, one of the Haverfords' own properties. 300 guests, a reception in the grand ballroom, a dinner catered by a chef flown in from Montreal. The ceremony itself was to be held in the hotel's private chapel at 1 o'clock, with the reception and dinner immediately following in the ballroom upstairs. I arrived early. I wore black, and I carried a slim leather portfolio instead of a purse. When Claire saw me in the bridal suite, she paused mid-sentence with her makeup artist. "Mom, why are you wearing black?" I embraced her carefully, so as not to disturb her hair. "You look so beautiful, sweetheart. I promise I will explain everything soon. Just trust me today." She searched my face. She was my daughter. She knew me. She did not press. The ceremony was lovely in the shallow way those things always are. Claire walked down the aisle on the arm of my late husband's brother, who had flown in from Halifax for the occasion. Spencer stood at the front with his best man, smiling the practiced smile of a man closing a deal. The minister spoke about love and partnership. Celeste dabbed at dry eyes with a silk handkerchief. I sat in the front pew with my portfolio across my knees, and I waited, and I waited. And when the minister began to speak the words about any lawful reason these two should not be joined, I did not move. I did not speak, because what I was about to do should not be done at a ceremony. It should be done at the reception, in front of the same room that had witnessed Celeste dismiss my daughter 2 weeks earlier, in front of the journalists and the board members and the investors who needed to see what I had found. The ceremony ended. The couple exchanged rings, signed their papers with the officiant, and the guests rose and moved upstairs to the ballroom for the reception. I went with them. I took my seat at a table near the front, and I waited through the cocktail hour, and the first 2 courses, and I held my tongue through Celeste's welcome speech, in which she referred to Claire as a dear project, and I did not move when Jonathan raised his glass to family values. It was when the champagne was poured for the formal toast, and Celeste was standing with her flute raised and her smile at full wattage, that I rose from my chair. I wonder if I might say a few words as the mother of the bride. The room shifted. Celeste's smile tightened at the corners. "Margaret, we haven't finished the... It will only take a moment." I walked to the small stage where the microphone stood, and I took it gently from its stand. 300 people watched me. Claire watched me, her expression caught somewhere between confusion and a terrible dawning recognition. I opened my portfolio on the podium. "Good evening. My name is Margaret Caldwell. I am Claire's mother. For 34 years I worked as a senior accountant at a family firm in Kingston, Ontario. Before that, I took night courses in forensic accounting at Queen's University. Do you know what accountants do? We find things. We find what people hide in the spaces between numbers. We find the truth when it has been very carefully buried under paperwork. Jonathan Haverford stood up halfway, then seemed to realize that standing would draw attention, and sat back down. I would like to tell you all some things I have learned about the family my daughter has just married into. I want you to hear them, because I want my daughter to hear them alongside you. Celeste moved toward me. Margaret, this is absolutely not the time. It is exactly the time. You had your time 2 weeks ago when you stood up in this same room and told 200 of your closest friends that my daughter was a humble project you were generously willing to take on. I turned back to the room and I lifted the first document. Jonathan Haverford has maintained a second family in Oakville for 19 years. Her name is Melanie Arsenault. They have 3 children together, ages 9, 14, and 17. He has been funding that household through a numbered Ontario corporation created for that specific purpose, while his wife sat on the board of the Haverford Family Foundation and gave speeches about the importance of traditional marriage. The sound that went through the room was not quite a gasp and not quite silence. It was the sound of 300 people all inhaling at once. I lifted the second document. Haverford Capital Partners is the subject of an active investigation by the Ontario Securities Commission. The firm has been misrepresenting client portfolios, concealing investment losses, and using new investor capital to meet redemption requests from existing clients. I have copies of the preliminary commission filings here. If any of you in this room are currently invested with this firm, you should call your lawyer on Monday morning. A man at a table in the middle of the room stood up abruptly and walked out. Then another. Then a woman in a silver dress. I lifted the third document, and I looked directly at my daughter. 3 days ago, I was in Claire's condo preparing photographs for this reception. Spencer came home with his friend Trevor, unaware that I was there. I overheard the following conversation. I read it. I read every word because I had written it down on the train that night, and I had memorized it by morning. I watched Spencer's face go through every color a face can make. I watched Claire's hands come up to cover her mouth. I watched Celeste sink slowly into the chair behind her. When I finished, I closed the portfolio. I am not the person who did any of these things. I am only the person who found out about them. The people who did them are at the head table. My daughter deserved to walk into her marriage with her eyes open. So does every person in this room who has trusted this family with their money. I placed copies of the documents in front of a woman at the press table whom I knew was a senior business reporter with the Globe and Mail. She had been invited to cover the society angle. She was about to earn a very different kind of byline. I set the microphone down. I walked off the stage. I did not look at Spencer. I did not look at Celeste. I walked straight to Claire and I held out my hand and my daughter stood up in her wedding dress and she took it. We left together through the side entrance of the ballroom. We did not run. We walked, her hand in mine, past the staring guests and the abandoned centerpieces and the wedding cake that no one would ever cut. The next 48 hours were a storm I do not have the words to describe properly. The Globe and Mail ran the story on Monday morning. By Tuesday, the OSC had frozen the assets of Haverford Capital. By Wednesday, the building inspector in Niagara on the Lake was under RCMP review. By Friday, Celeste had filed for divorce. She moved to a condominium in Victoria, British Columbia, and as far as I am aware, she has not returned to Ontario once in the 2 years since. Jonathan Haverford pled guilty in a Toronto courtroom to 7 counts of securities fraud and 1 count of breach of fiduciary duty. He was sentenced to 6 years in a federal institution near Kingston, which I find a quiet cosmic joke that I try not to dwell on too much. The hotel in Niagara on the Lake never opened. The firm was wound down. The investors did not all recover, but most of the retirees got enough back to hold on, and I take some comfort in that. Spencer came to Claire's condo exactly once. She did not open the door. He left eventually. He now works for an accounting firm in Calgary, which I find amusing given his feelings about accountants. For about 4 months, Claire was angry with me. Not for telling the truth, but for letting her walk down that aisle at all before I stopped it. She needed time. I gave it to her. I did not call. I waited. One Sunday in June, she pulled into my driveway in Kingston without warning. She sat at my kitchen table, the same table where she had told me about Spencer the September before, and she said, "Mom." If you had told me earlier, I would not have believed you. I needed to see it. I needed to see him say those things in his own voice in front of me. I held her for a long time. That was 18 months ago. Today, Claire is engaged again, to a pediatric surgeon named Nathan, whom she met at the hospital. He is quiet, patient, and clumsy at small talk in a way that I find enormously reassuring. He asked for my blessing before he asked for hers. He comes to Sunday supper and he does the dishes afterwards, and when I tried to stop him the first time, he looked genuinely confused and said, "Mrs. Caldwell, you cooked. It's only fair." His mother is a retired nurse from Thunder Bay. She hugged me when we met and said, "You raised an extraordinary young woman." Last month, Claire came to visit and told me, with that same small nervous smile from the Tim Hortons night, that she is pregnant. I cried the way I have not cried since her father died. 61 years old, sitting at my kitchen table in Kingston, crying because my daughter is going to be a mother and she is going to do it right, beside a man who sees her clearly, in a life built on what is actually there, instead of what someone wanted to pretend was there. I sit by my front window in the evenings now and I think about all of it. I think about Celeste in her condo overlooking the Pacific, forced at last to live in the small world she always deserved. I think about Jonathan in his federal cell, finally accountable in the literal sense. I think about Spencer in Calgary, reckoning, I hope, with the shape of the life he chose over my daughter. And I think about Claire, and her Nathan, and the grandchild who will arrive in May. Silence protects no one. Silence only protects the people who benefit from it. The truth, even when it costs you a wedding and a season of your daughter's forgiveness, is the only foundation a family can honestly be built on. I spent my working life sitting in a quiet office in a small city in eastern Ontario, adding up numbers for other people. I never imagined I would be the woman who ended a dynasty. But when a powerful family decided my daughter was a project to be managed, they made one mistake. They forgot that her mother had spent 34 years learning exactly where people hide the things they most hope no one will ever find. If you are listening to this somewhere tonight, and there is someone in your life trying to make you feel small, I want you to remember my story. You do not need wealth to fight back. You do not need a famous name or powerful friends. You only need the patience to find the truth, and the courage to say it out loud when it counts, because in the end, the truth always finds the daylight. It always does.